thought this might be a good Bible lesson. Excuse me. Ecclesiastes, at least from my vantage point, puts into perspective what life is all about. And Solomon, of course, the writer, talks about from experience some of the things that he tried and tested. The picture that I have in my mind is that of a man that is going into a laboratory and running a series of tests. And at the conclusion of his testing, he begins to weigh in the balances, so to speak, what he's tested, and then draw his conclusions. And so he's looking at life from some various angles. And Solomon had the opportunity to experience life at its fullest. And so there are some things that some statements that he makes in chapters 1 and 2 that I want to think about for a moment or two. And then we'll turn over to chapter 12. But I want to begin by looking at verse 12. Solomon said, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. So the first thing that really stands out in my mind as Solomon begins to look at life and the thrust of life and what it's all about, he talks about the immense power that he enjoyed. And Solomon succeeded his father David to the throne, the United Kingdom. And you think about the vast power that he wielded. And power can be, in many ways, insatiable. You know, it's one of those things, the more you have, the more you want. And I think that there are a number of things that factor in with power, one of which would be money and materialism. But I remember years ago when I was living in Nashville, I just got out of college and I was working for a guy that had done very well in the business world. And they were having a primary race, or they were in the process of trying to elect a new mayor. And this was back in the mid-1980s. And the mayoral race was going to cost about $100,000. And I remember asking this guy, I said, why would somebody spend $100,000 to be elected as mayor? And he said, well, I can tell you why. He said, check their financial statements before they go in, check them when they come out. And I thought, well, that makes sense to me. But power, when you have unlimited power, then that opens a lot of doors and gives you access to a lot of things, and you can sort of build your treasures from there. But first and foremost, he was an incredibly powerful man. And then secondly, drop down, look at verse 16. He said, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I've attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. The second thing that stands out in my mind is the popularity or the prominence of Solomon. You remember Jesus said that the queen of the south, Queen of Sheba, came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and her response was, the half hasn't been told. Solomon must have been an immensely popular man in his day and time. I mean, everybody knew who he was. I mean, he was the king of Israel. And so you think about his power and then his popularity, and there are people in our world today, their goal in life is to become powerful. They want to be a household name. Many of us have known people that have gained fame and lots of attention and notoriety in entertainment, sports, and other things. And, people have this idea that if I could just have power, and then if I could add to that equation popularity or just being a household name, surely that would make me happy. You remember Elvis Presley back in the day? When I was growing up, my mom and dad loved Elvis. And back in the day, they used to listen to 8-track tapes. Any of you remember the old 8-track tapes?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And then it went from 8-tracks to cassettes and cassettes to CDs and whatnot. But my folks loved Elvis. And I remember the day he died, I was cutting grass. I was 17 years old. I was in high school. I was cutting a lady's yard, and her husband had had a stroke back some months earlier. and he was a relatively young man, and it had disabled him. And so she drove wherever they went, and she pulled in the driveway and jumped out of the car, and she was crying. I thought, oh man, I thought something had happened to her husband. But she said Elvis died. And I mean, she was that shook up. But what really stands out in my mind, that's been 40, I'm 77, so that's been 48 years ago.
Hmm.
And you could go anywhere in this world, I imagine, and all you have to say is the name Elvis. People know who you're talking about. I mean, when my son was in elementary school, we went through Graceland. And of course, I grew up hearing about Elvis, listening to his music, and I knew he was big time. But it wasn't until I went into Graceland and began touring Graceland that I realized just how unbelievably great this man was in the entertainment. I mean, I think he sold over 1 billion records. And you go through and you see, and it's just unbelievable, all the memorabilia, the outfits, and the accolades, and just lining walls. It was unreal to go through. And when it's all said and done, it's like, this guy was something. He was an amazing guy. So I think about power, popularity. Then drop down to chapter 2 and look at verse 4. In verse 4, Solomon said, I made my works great. I built myself houses, planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants, had servants born in my house, yes, had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great, excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. So now think about his material wealth, just the vast things that he possessed in this life. And there are people in the world today that, in their heart of hearts, they really believe if they had more money, more material goods, surely that would bring them satisfaction and contentment. I mean, that's how they think. I mean, that's how people are. Look over in chapter 5 very quickly with that thought in mind. And look at chapter 5, verse 10. This is from the voice of one who's come to understand some things. He said, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. He said, this also is vanity. And really, I think what Solomon's saying is, the more you have, the more you want. Never get enough. There are people today that have tons of money, but they're really not happy. They think they'll be happy, but they're not. Then there's another thing. Drop down. Look at verse 10. In verse 10, Solomon said, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. And now he's talking about the fact that he had immersed himself in the pleasures of life. And can you imagine just having the ability to just get whatever you want, buy whatever you want, go wherever you want? If you see it, you like it, you want it, you get it. And so here's a guy that, he can get anything he wants. The Bible talks about, in 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 4, Paul talks about people who are lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And if we're not careful, sometimes we can allow the material side of life to encroach upon our spiritual lives. So, by way of just looking back, Solomon's got power, he's got popularity or prominence, he's got all kinds of possessions. He said, I've got pleasures in this life, all these things. And so if we were to ask people today, all right, if I could promise you that you can have power, you can have prominence, you can have material possessions, you can have pleasures, you can have all these things, think that'd make you happy? Many people would say, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of people that if you offered them that, they would say, surely this would this would be the end all be all. But look down verse 17. Listen to what Solomon said in light of everything he's just said. This is really amazing to me. Therefore, I hated life. Here's a guy who had everything from our vantage point. Mm-hmm. But he's saying, I hated life.
What verse is that?
Verse 17, chapter 2. I'm sorry.
You're good.
BJ and I were doing a program. We were doing a counterpoint program one day, and Elvis Presley came up. And BJ said that he was preaching at South Haven one day, one Sunday morning, I think. And there was a couple that they were visiting. He didn't know it at the time. But the following evening, he went to their house to visit them because they visited the day before. And BJ, during the course of his sermon, had mentioned Elvis Presley. And he said that he had seen an interview, heard about an interview, where Elvis was being interviewed, and he made the statement. He said, sometimes I think I'm the most miserable person in this world. The guy doing the interview said, now, come on, Elvis, you know that's not true. I said, no, it's true. He said, sometimes I think I'm the most miserable person in the world. And so when BJ went to visit this couple, they said, when you made that statement, they said, our ears perked up. The guy said, I was with Elvis when he made that statement in that interview. And he said, the guy was trying to coax him into saying, surely you don't mean it. He said, no, I really mean it. There was a lady that I used to teach a Tuesday morning Bible class for a long time. She worked at Graceland. And she said that Elvis and his aunt would stand at the window looking down at the front of Graceland. All these people would be lined out at their gate. And he would say, why don't they go home? Don't they have a home to go to? Like he didn't understand it. Like, why are these people, why are they so attracted to me, And I knew another guy that spent a lot of time with Elvis. He got to know him before the war, or I take that back. He got to know him before Elvis went into service back in the 50s. They became good friends, and he had the opportunity to sing with Elvis. And he said that Elvis visited the Lord's Church in Whitehaven one Sunday evening. His stepmother was a member of the church, Dee. Mm-hmm. And so Vernon would go to services with his wife. And Elvis went one night. And when he got there, and I'm sure, somebody like that comes in the door, you're just going to cover him up and you're trying to be nice, but also you're sort of awestruck. And when he left, he said, I can't go back again. Those people can't worship God with me there. So I think there was some humility there. It's just sad. He had a lot of contacts with people that were in the church. It's sad he never obeyed the gospel. But in many ways, I look at his life and I think about, here's a guy that had everything, but the other side of the coin is he had nothing. He really didn't have what was valuable. He had all these toys and all, everything you could ever want in life, but I don't think the guy was just truly content and satisfied with life. So anyway, that being said, turn now to chapter 12. In chapter 12, I guess we could really look at chapter 11, verses 9 and 10, but we'll just drop down and look at verse 12. Solomon now, I think, is kind of putting into perspective his series of studies and what life's all about. You remember he said in verse 1, remember now your Creator, the days of your youth. You ever wondered why Solomon would encourage people to remember the Creator when you're young? Yeah, and I think when we get older in life, we get settled in our we kind of get set in our ways, don't we? If you develop bad habits when you're young, it's hard to get rid of those bad habits. But if you start learning to serve God and appreciate spiritual things when you're young in life, it's going to make for a lot easier life.
ties into train up a child in the way to go.
Yeah, yeah. So Solomon, beginning here, gives sort of a poetic narration of life and the aging process. And whether we like it or not, no one's immune from the aging process. And, I think about, I've often told young people, where you are, I once was. And where I am, Lord willing, you will be one day. David said one time, I was young, now I'm old. And it's amazing how quickly life gets away. It's a blink. The psalmist said on one occasion, remember how short my time is. And I know time goes the same for everybody. When you're a kid, it seems like it just moves at a snail's pace. But when you get to be an adult, it's like warp speed. And one day your kids are this small, next day, they're grown, got kids of their own. Just crazy. And so Solomon talks about the aging process and then death. And then down in verse, you remember Solomon said, drop down if you would, and note verse 7. At death, he said, the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. So when it's all said and done, our spirit, our soul will go back to be with the Lord. Our body will turn to dust. And all the things that we've accumulated, all the accolades that we've enjoyed here on earth, all of those things we leave behind, don't we? Doesn't matter how rich, how wealthy, how well known you are, all that stays behind. Paul said on one occasion in 1 Timothy chapter 6, we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And that's a humbling statement. I can't help but think about people that I mentioned, Elvis and Graceland, and the guy has generated billions of dollars of revenue. He continues to generate lots of revenue. And if he were alive today, he could be on the road and he'd be rolling. But and that was one of the things that I remember when we were at Graceland. We're going through and we're looking at all these accolades and all the things that he enjoyed in his life. And then we get out in the back and we come face to face with his grave. You think, here's a guy that had everything. Here's where he is now. He's in the grave, not enjoying any of this stuff. So that just, it's a sobering reminder. Now, look down verse 13. Solomon said, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. So now it's like, okay, let me tell you what I have concluded about life. Here's what it's about. Fear God and keep his commandments. Sometimes this translation I'm using right now, the New King James, it says, for this is the whole duty of man. There's a translation that I read one time, and I love the it says, for this is man's all. And I think that captures the essence of what he's saying. If you want to know what life's all about, it's about fearing God and keeping his commandments. That's the summation of life right there. And if you miss that, you miss life. And so he said, verse 14, here's a reminder. Because Solomon now reminds us that we're accountable to God. We live in a day and time when people don't like the idea of being accountable. They want to shift the blame. They don't want to take accountability, responsibility for their actions. And yet Solomon said God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it is evil. So what we do here will follow us into the next life. And, there are people in our world today, they have this idea that, they've gotten away with things and, nobody knows what they've said. Nobody knows what they've done. And they got skeletons in their closet. And, I think about some of the people that have committed heinous crimes and have gotten off scot-free. in their mind they beat the system, but they really didn't. Because when it's all said and done, you're going to stand before the judge of all the earth. I can assure you, he's going to hold you accountable for what you've done. So that's a sobering thought. So anyway, the thrust of life, keeping life in perspective. It's about living for God, serving Him, so that one day we can be with Him. All right. I guess that's what I got today.
Well, I have a note in there for Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that's to me, that's profound as for us as Christians, we can't go wrong if we're following Him. If we're diligent to keep His words, we can't really.
You can't go wrong.
Can't go wrong.
Okay. And I mean, like the book of Ecclesiastes, or rather the book of Proverbs, you think about some of the statements that are made that really kind of encapsulate life. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And, it really begins and ends with God. Mm-hmm. And we live in a highly secularized society. And one of the challenges that we face today is people are more interested in the secular than the spiritual. Mm-hmm. And when life's good and you got everything you want, everything you need, you get this idea: I don't need God. Why would I need God? Mm-hmm. And you go back and you look like the Great Depression, World War II. It kept people humble. Right. And I think sometimes. I had a friend of mine tell me one time, he said, we do better in times of adversity rather than times of prosperity. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
That's when the church seems to have gotten handed more too, with times of that adversity.
I think so.
People maybe
Well, it kind of seems like we're in that swing right now, because they said that not in all places, but right now, a lot of the younger people, the Gen Z, they're really seeking, because they're tired of all the fluff. They're looking to get back. And I think we're in kind of that swing of kind of adversity that we haven't had for a couple decades.
So, Jesus said, I've come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. And you can have an abundant life here. The blessings that we can enjoy in Christ far outweigh the blessings that people are chasing today. Mm-hmm. in a material world. And I think what happened, the devil has done a good job of deceiving people. And it's kind of like a cat chasing his tail. You're on this never-ending quest to find contentment and happiness and satisfaction. And Paul said, godliness with contentment is great gain. So, to me, the spiritual side of life is what really pays off.
I had a thought while you were talking about Solomon. I wonder where his dad, David, started out as a shepherd, then accumulated all of this. If he had a different outlook than right. Solomon, who started with a lot and only gained more, he didn't have that period of being poor, essentially.
Yeah, he didn't have the humble beginning. I never thought about that. That's a great point. That David was just a shepherd boy, didn't fit the profile of a king. Who would have thought, mm-hmm. That he would become the king? But he had a heart. I think that was David's heart was in the right place.
Mm-hmm. Well, he kind of started with God. When he faced Goliath, he's delivered me from the bear and from the lion. Yeah. God's brought me through this, will bring me through this. And he had that, mm-hmm, fear of the God as the beginning of wisdom. And he entered into his kingship without a lot of this worldly.
Yeah, it makes me think about like in Psalm 8, when he talks about, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars, which you've ordained. And he asks, what's man? What's the son of man that you visit? And you made him a little lower than the angels, crown him glory and honor. And I think about, David had time for quiet reflection. And, when he said, the heavens declare the glory of God, I can just imagine him sitting out looking up at stars, thinking about God. And so I think that's a great thought. What you said, that David had a humble beginning and he didn't have all that.
Mhm.
And sometimes, maybe to kind of piggyback that thought a little bit, how many parents have said, I want my children to have it better than I have? And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting good things for our kids. But is it possible that we've gone overboard, spoiled them? We've given them everything that they could ever want. They've never had to work for anything. And we've just dumped all this in their lap. And there's no real appreciation or work ethic to have anything.
Mm-hmm. One of those things, like my daughter has a pretty nice car. She pays for it. She's been paying for it from the beginning. That's I'm not going to buy it for you. And that
Sure.
was, she respects it a lot more and takes care of it a lot more. And then I've seen kids who've gotten their vehicles handed to them and they just destroy them because there's no value. They haven't put their heart and sweat and their blood and their tears into it.
Yeah. When I was, I guess, right out of college, I would see kids in the Brentwood area, which that was a very affluent area, just Williamson County, right across Davidson County line. And they'd be driving BMWs and all these fancy cars. And I remember I would think, so you're 17, 18, 19 years old, and you're driving around in a, very, very nice car. So what you got to look forward to? I mean, like if you get everything you want, if it's just handed to you, what's the satisfaction in trying to work and save and have something that you really want?
Mm-hmm. Many people don't understand or appreciate the satisfaction in a job well done.
When you've worked hard to try to buy something that you want. I remember when I was a kid, I cut grass to make money, and I wanted a pair of Converse tennis shoes. And I mean, because if we wanted it, we had to go buy them. We had to save and buy it ourselves. And it seemed like they were like 17, 18 bucks. And I had to really study, I had to really study on that thing. Now, do I really want to spend my money? Do I want to spend this much money on a pair of shoes? That's a lot of money, and so, I mean, I had to weigh, you have to weigh things out. Whereas if you just get it handed to you, it's no big deal.
Absolutely. Well, I think a thing too, more religiously, I think as preachers sometimes, if you use someone else's lesson and just verbatim, just go through it, I don't think you get the satisfaction of the study and of the research that go. To me, I can always tell when I've been short on time and have to throw one together versus being able to really study for one. There's a lot more satisfaction in putting that time in and that effort in.
Exactly.
And that's that kind of being able to differentiate between and put the effort in. Some people aren't willing to do that.
I mean, yeah, because I think there's a lot of joy and satisfaction in the creation process of it. You're creating something that you're going to share, and you sort of live with it, and it live with it for several days or weeks or whatever, and then you get to share it, and it sort of becomes a part of your DNA when you're delivering it. I think it makes it is more meaningful.
No, I like that. Ecclesiastes is one of those books that I've used it during funerals. That's chapter 3.
Oh yeah.
Chapter 3. Yeah, where there's a time for everything, and it's a book that I think sometimes people gloss over. But there's a lot of
good,
very profound
a lot
points
of
in
good
that book.
wisdom in Ecclesiastes. And, Solomon, for all the wisdom that he had, he sure made a lot of mistakes in life. He lived below the wisdom and knowledge that he possessed, which a lot of folks do that,
Yeah.
I mean, we've known people that have grown up in the church. They know better than they know better than the lifestyle they're living.
Mm-hmm.
They live beneath themselves, and that's a shame.
Do you wonder if maybe that's where, when Paul talked about the preaching of the cross is foolishness, it was not, he was humbling himself because he had full inspiration and he could have put out all this wisdom, but didn't. It would maybe turn people off.
Yeah.
Where he kind of went to their level.
Paul sort of became all things to all men.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was a very knowledgeable. I think he certainly had a lot of respect in Jewish circles,
Mm-hmm.
and the humility that he had to change.
Right. Yeah. So not even the inspiration he possessed, but the training he received prior to. Would have been
Sat at the feet of Gamaliel. I mean, he was quite a man.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's a great study.
Mm-hmm. Well, I enjoyed that greatly. I appreciate you coming in and
I'm happy
doing this study for us.
I hope it was helpful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Enjoyed breakfast. Enjoyed the fellowship. The fellowship.